Good evening. Well, thank you for joining us for Ask Abouna. And we're going to get started here right away. We already have a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them right in the comments, the live chat, rather. If you have questions that are private, you can text them to me or send them through email by replying to the email that I sent. So we already have a couple of questions on deck, three actually. This first one, there are several parts to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And again, if you have questions, please put them right in the live chat. So the first one was about the ordination service that recently took place, the ordination of a priest. If you remember, this past Friday, Bishop Thomas was at our church and ordained Father Martin Johnson to the priesthood. So some questions concerning the things that we saw there. First of all, the question asks about the 3 times that Father Martin knelt when he was still a deacon. He knelt 3 times. So there were 2 deacons that presented him for ordination. They made him do a prostration, a full prostration, which means he knelt down and touched his head to the ground and then stood up and made the sign of the cross. So he did that 3 times. The first time, the deacon exclaimed the word command, in Greek, kelefson. So what he was doing is he was telling the bishop to command Deacon Martin to come forth towards ordination. And really asking his blessing. The second time, the second deacon said command, but in Greek, there's a difference, whereas in English, there's no difference. The first time the deacon says kelefson, command. The second time he says kalefsate, which is command in the plural. The second command is actually asking the people to command. So the first time is for the bishop. The second time is for the people, saying to the people that they have a say in the ordination. And that's how we do like a check and balance. It's almost like an election, but not really. It's like by acclamation, saying that you are approving of this person to be ordained. And part 2 of that will come here in a little bit. We'll talk about that at the end of the ordination service here. And then the third time they say again, command, Holy Master, him who cometh before thee. And so again, the last one is to the bishop. So that's why he does those 3 prostrations, asking for the blessing of the bishop, the people, and then again from the bishop after the people give their blessing. So that's done by people who are the same rank that you are. So since he was going to be ordained a priest, he started off a deacon. The deacons present him to ordination, and then they hand him over to the rank that he's going to become. So, for example, when somebody's ordained a deacon, usually subdeacons take him and present him for ordination. And then they hand him over to the deacons who will take him around the altar table. To be ordained a priest, 2 deacons present you to ordination, and then they hand you over to the priests. And the priests are sponsoring you into the priesthood, because you can't sponsor somebody into something that you don't have. So the priests then take him around the altar. So he circles the altar table 3 times. Remember last week on Ask Abouna, I mentioned that the ordination is very much like a wedding service, and Bishop Thomas actually made reference to that when he spoke. He's married first to his wife, and then second to the church, and so he's married to the church. Traditionally, a priest would be ordained at the altar that he's going to serve, because he's married to that community. However, due to the COVID restrictions, and it doesn't always work out this way, sometimes priests like to get ordained in their home parish where their families are, and of course all that's understandable, but ideally they're ordained in the parish that they're going to serve. So the people who circled the altar with Father Martin, again, those are his sponsors. So in his case, it was Father Paul Abernathy, who was actually a classmate of mine at St. Tikhon's. And the other priest was Father Bogdan, who is a Romanian priest. And he was kind of a mentor to Father Martin, and Father Martin is actually taking over Father Bogdan's parish. Father Bogdan will be going to be a priest at St. Vladimir Seminary, a professor rather at St. Vladimir Seminary. So those were the people who were sponsoring him. Then the next question here is the changing of his priest vestments and the dressing of him. Each part had a significance. Yes, so each piece of vestment has a significance. Each piece has a special prayer that's being said. I'm not going to go through the significance of each piece right now, because in the near future, hopefully, we're going to have a Bible study all about the liturgy. And part of that is the pieces of vestments. There'll be a whole lesson dedicated to the vestments of the deacon, the priest, and the bishop. So, but he was vested. His deacon's orarion, that's the long belt he wears on his shoulder, that was removed. And then piece by piece, the vestments were put on. And before putting on each piece of vestment, the bishop exclaimed, Axios, or Mustahak, or he is worthy. So what the bishop is doing is he's not saying that he is worthy. He's asking the people who know him, is he worthy? And the people respond, Axios. They also have the option of yelling, Anaxios, or he is not worthy, or غير مستحق, or ليس مستحق, means not worthy. So the people have the option to do that. Let's say there was something about the candidate that people didn't know, but some people didn't know. It's kind of like that tradition, which, by the way, is not a tradition, but in the Orthodox Church. But imagine at a wedding where they say, if anyone has anything to say, let them say it now or forever hold their peace. That's kind of the same idea of you have one last chance to speak. If you don't say anything, then we're going to declare him worthy. So the people have a say in the ordination of the deacon and the priest and bishop as well. So that was, let's see if there's any other things here. Yeah, so that answers pretty much all the questions here. The other question was why were the vestments different colors, white versus gold? They were actually both gold. You might not have been able to see over the camera, but the design can be any design. That's just, if you look at priest vestments, you'll find thousands of different designs. Everybody can design their own things. There are certain things that have to be the same from vestment to vestment, and other things that change from vestment to vestment. So anyway, that's that answer. So I got another question here. Thank you for those questions. We have another one here. Let's see. Okay, so what's the Orthodox Church's social justice stance? Let's see. Okay, so it's not a very specific question. It's kind of generic. But how do we respond to social justice issues in the church? So Jesus Christ himself in the Gospels, St. Paul and the other apostles in the epistles, the prophets in the Old Testament, they taught us what the faith was. And they taught us the truth. And those things really didn't change. Occasionally from the Old Testament to the New Testament, some things were fulfilled and so no longer had to be practiced. For example, the eating of unclean animals, like they couldn't eat pork in the Old Testament, and a number of other things, including things like shrimp. In the New Testament, we can. So some of those things were fulfilled. Some other things were expounded upon. For example, in the Old Testament, Moses told them that if they wanted to, they could divorce their wives and marry someone else. That was to actually help fix the situation. But Jesus then came back and said, I know that Moses told you this, but I'm going to tell you, do not divorce your wives. Stay with your wife. They would divorce their wives for a number of reasons. One, if she couldn't have children, or she was displeasing to him or his family. Christianity, by the way, really elevated the place of the woman and made her an equal to man. We didn't see that back in the Jewish days and the ancient Roman and Greek days. It was a new concept with Christianity. So a lot of times when people say that Christianity is oppressive to women, they don't really understand what Christianity did for women and what it continues to do. I mean, the highest person in the history of the world is a woman, the Theotokos. So she's right after Christ, who is God. So with social justice issues, if I'm understanding the question correctly, what do we say? Well, there are a number of issues in our society that the world teaches us different than what the church teaches us. So how do we justify that? Well, we believe that Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His teachings never change. And as a result, we never change the teachings of the church. The teachings of the church are unchanged because God is unchanged. So does that make us unmerciful? Does that make us hateful? No, absolutely not. For example, the stance on, we'll just pick one that's kind of popular, abortion, for example. The church teaches that abortion is murder. So is that the church being unsympathetic to young mothers or unexpected mothers, or a number of different cases? I hear people say, like, well, if she's forced to have the child, then her whole life is going to be ruined. Is that the way the church sees it? I'd say, of course not. We believe that Christ, Jesus Christ, God, is the most merciful. You cannot be more merciful than God. And so God's sense of justice is the ultimate justice. And if he says not to do something, by us saying, no, it is okay to do something, are we really teaching something contrary to Christ? And what does it mean to be merciful? To be merciful means that God loves us. He wants us to be with him. He desires our salvation. And by saying something opposite of what Christ is saying, we're actually not being merciful. We're encouraging somebody to sin. We're encouraging somebody's separation from God. So while some things are hard, your parents have probably always told you life isn't easy, life is hard, life isn't always fair. And all those things are true. It's our salvation that is fair, our judgment that is fair, right? Jesus says, as I see, I judge, and my judgment is just. And so we have to not try and be more merciful than God, because that's impossible. What we do is we end up lying to ourselves and to other people in the name of social justice, saying we are doing what's merciful. We're not. If it's not what God prescribes, then it is not merciful. In fact, it's cruel to encourage somebody to do something different than what God has taught us. So that's a little bit on social justice. Okay. I think I answered that question. Go to our next one. Again, please feel free to write a question in the live chat, and I should be able to get that. Let me see here. I want to make sure our live chat is working. Okay, looks like it is working. So if you have any questions, please write them in. And actually, if somebody's watching, please write something in the live chat, even if you just write test. I just want to make sure that those are coming in. All right, and I'll move on to our next question. It says, what do you call your headpiece? And also, you remove it several times during the church service. Is there a reason for that? Thank you. Excellent question. There is. So that hat is called the kamalavki in Greek. In Arabic, it's called the eluse. It really doesn't have a name in English, so we usually just call it the kalimavki. So I put it on my head during certain times of the service. So it's actually something that I can wear out in public. And in the Byzantine Empire, priests would wear those kind of head coverings. This one it's kind of a hard rim. It kind of hurts my head after I wear it for a while. The times we're supposed to wear it, we uncover our head in the altar as priests. And by the way, clergy are the only men who are allowed to wear anything on their head in the church. Women are traditionally always supposed to cover their head in the church. We don't mandate that anymore. But if a woman wants to cover her head in the church, she's certainly welcome to. But the priests wear their head coverings to remind them that they are under obedience to a bishop and also under God. And so we wear that head covering when we leave the altar. So anytime I sense, sometimes I put it on in the altar if I'm going to leave the altar, like the sense, or do the dismissal or something like that. We don't need to wear it in the altar because we are in the altar, and that's like the Holy of Holies. That's where God is dwelling. So we don't wear it when we are inside the altar because we already have that reminder. So thank you for that question. Okay. Our next question, again, if somebody could, if you wouldn't mind writing something in the chat, even if you just write test. I have a note here saying that I'm unable to connect to chat, so I hope I'm not missing your questions, but I don't see any questions on here. So please write something in the live chat here on YouTube, or else you can always send me a question through email or text message. It says in this question, Peter also betrayed Jesus by denying him 3 times. Was his betrayal less harmful than Judas? That's a great question. And actually, they're kind of the same thing. Judas's betrayal Peter's denial and Peter's betrayal are the same thing, really. Well, I don't want to say they're the same thing because Judas was the one who caused Jesus to die. The difference is, the big difference between between Judas and Peter is that Judas became his own judge. He despaired, and his judgment on himself was death. And so without repenting and without leaving himself the chance of repentance, he ended his own life. Peter, on the other hand, realized what his sin was. He wept bitterly, the same way Judas did, but he asked God for forgiveness. And he went back to the disciples. And actually, the way we can show that or prove that God did forgive Peter, remember the angel, who is a messenger of God, the angel said to Mary Magdalene, go tell his disciples and Peter that I will be with them, that I will meet them in Galilee. And so Jesus sends a message to the angel that Judas's forgiveness has been granted, his repentance has been accepted, and he is once again one of the apostles. Go tell the apostles and Peter, meaning don't forget, even though he denied me, he's still one of my apostles. So that's a very important point that is made. So thank you for that question. That was very good. Apparently I can't see the questions on my... okay, we got another question here. And having some trouble here with my YouTube. Okay. All right, we have a question here. As Orthodox Christians, we declare we are the true faith, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. How are we to view non-Orthodox communities, and how do we interact with them? Excellent question. Thank you, Andrew. The way we look at non-Orthodox communities that are still Christian is that they are just that, they're Christian, which means they hold some basic truth. They're not completely devoid of truth. They read the Bible, sometimes not the same exact Bible that we read. Excuse me. but they do hold a number of truths in their teachings. They are getting to know Jesus Christ, but they probably can't get to know him on the same caliber that we can. So different faiths have different levels of like a spiritual maturity. So some churches are more entertaining. You go to be entertained. There are rock bands. There's a message that just kind of makes you feel good and happy. And that isn't what Orthodoxy does. So is what they do bad? No, it's not bad, but it's not really true worship, which is what Orthodoxy means, true believing or true worship. Orthodoxia, true glory is literally how it gets translated. Because doxa is the word for glory, like we say glory to the Father, doxa patri. So then you have other levels of Christianity where there's more of a liturgical worship. It's a higher level of worship. But remember, because we're such an ancient church, we are the church of the apostles. We are an unchanged church for thousands of years. So our worship is ancient. It's been proven over time. It's created many saints. So there's no reason to change our worship. It's literally unchanged. And so what we have is very superior, but not in a way that we should boast about it. We have to be humble, because really, what did I do to deserve it? For me, I was born into the Orthodox faith. Some other people who converted to Orthodoxy, maybe they deserve even more credit because they left their background that they were comfortable with. They came to Orthodoxy. And there's something very beautiful about that. We never judge anybody of another faith. We never judge the other denominations other than the theology. And the theology is judged on the base of its merits. It has nothing to do with the people in the church. It has only to do with the theology and the search for the truth, the true worship. So in Orthodoxy, we're obsessed in a way with the truth, right? The truth shall set you free. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And Pontius Pilate asked, what is truth? So we are presenting truth, and we're saying this is the truth about all things. And so this is how we teach as Orthodox Christians. Other people miss certain parts of the truth, other denominations. So what happens to them when they die? Do they go to heaven? Only God can answer that, because again, as I said earlier, Jesus says in the book of John, as I see, I judge, and my judgment is just. And so Jesus Christ's judgment is the only one that holds anything. I can't say to a Protestant or a Roman Catholic or an evangelical or born-again Christian that I'm going to be saved and you're not. We don't speak like that as Orthodox. We would never try to judge anyone. However, we know the sure path to salvation, if you follow it, comes through the Orthodox Church. Anywhere else, you're kind of on your own. You don't have the Orthodox path to salvation, the true path. So whether or not you get there, that's up to God. It's kind of a gamble, but we know through the Orthodox Church, if you follow the teachings of the Church, the path that the fathers have set forth, we know that salvation is guaranteed because Christ has taught through the fathers. So thank you. That was an excellent question. And it looks like Juliana here has a question. She wants to know why we go to church. Such a deep question from a 4-year-old. So excuse me for a second. The reason we go to church, the church is the gathering place. You know, during the Paschal period, the entrance hymn, known as the Isiodikon, that I chant, en ekklesias, which in Greek means in the churches. Sometimes we translate that to either in the churches or in the gathering places. So in the churches, we come together and we bless God. We worship God. We don't bless him the way he blesses us. We bless him by praising his name. So we go to church, one, because it's a house of God. So even though God is around us all over the place, we gather there together because it's a more concentrated prayer, first of all. It's like one drop of water versus the whole ocean. When we all come together, our prayer is strong, and we send that up to God as a community. Jesus Christ said, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I shall be among them. And that's a very powerful thing as well. God, since the Old Testament times, has dwelt in his Holy of Holies. So where is that Holy of Holies? The Holy of Holies has been replaced by the altar. So that is the place where God dwells. And it's almost like a concentration. It's a set aside place. In Christianity, we have a lot of things that are set aside. Priests are set aside for the ministry. Monastics are set aside. And that's really what the word holy means. It means set aside for God. And the church is a holy space because it's set aside for God. This is why in the church we don't allow, and I'm very careful to not allow any kind of secular things. So like secular music. This is why I told our choir that we can only sing Orthodox music in the church, because the church is set aside for godly things only. We don't allow a lot of things inside the building of the church. Again, it's a holy place. And so we go to church to take on some of that holiness, to experience some of the holiness, to live it and breathe it. In the Orthodox Church, we worship with 5 senses. You don't get those 5 senses when you stay home, right? We touch things. We touch the icons. We even touch each other. We kiss the priest's hand. We see the icons. We hear the chanting. We smell the incense. We taste the body and blood of Christ. The communion hymn of Pascha, taste and see how good the Lord is. I'm sorry, that's for the pre-sanctified liturgy. So that's the only way we can experience God, and that fullness is inside the church. Can we still experience God outside of church? Sure, but not in that fullness. So good question, Juliana. Got a couple other questions here. Okay. We have a question. So there's a question asking about the governance of the church. How is the church supposed to be governed as a hierarchical church? Is it the job of the people or the priest to run the church? So that's a tricky question. There are some churches who have a history of priest takes care of the worship and the parish councils take care of the rest of the church. Well, remember that you call your priest father. You call your priest father. So let's say you are teenage children or even adult children living in a house with your father. When your father says something, you wouldn't say, Dad, don't worry about that. You just worry about going out and making the money, and we'll take care of the rest of the things. You don't have to worry about that. You would never talk to your dad like that. And if you do, shame on you. So you wouldn't talk to your priest like that either. The priest is the father of the church, and the church includes all of the organizations, all the people, the building, the finances, all kinds of things. In fact, there have been several parishes that have gotten in deep trouble because they've kept their priest out of certain aspects, and that's created huge fights. It's created embezzlement. It's created all kinds of issues in the church because the priest was not involved. He was not overseeing those things. Our archdiocese has actually changed the model. Not that the model was any different. It wasn't any different, but they didn't really enforce it before. They kind of let the parish councils run the church on their own. However, this model has changed. Now when the priest, the church every year has to submit papers to the archdiocese with our finances, with our assets, with our numbers, all those kinds of things. It used to be submitted by the parish council president and treasurer. Now it's submitted by the priest. The priest signature goes on it, which means the priest is held responsible for all those things, but also that he's in charge of them. Why do we do that? Because the priest takes on several roles in the parish. He's not only the father, he has an apostolic nature, he has a prophetic nature, he has a judge nature, just like the judges in the Old Testament. So many times I have two people who come to me as the priest and ask me to judge something in between them. Sometimes husband and wife, sometimes it's parents and children, sometimes it's other family members. So they come before the priest to judge. Sometimes I have parishioners who are disagreeing about things in the church. So how does the priest respond? He does what's best for the entire parish, just like a father would do what's best, not only for that child, but also for the entire family. He can't let one child do something that's going to be destructive for the rest of the family. And so we have to make the right judgment for the entire parish. So if the priest is being told to stay out of construction or finances or whatever it is, that's actually dangerous for the parish. So the priest is involved in everything. I'm happy that our parish council here asks the priests about all the different things in the church, like anything from air conditioning to finances. And so that's a healthy way to do things, is to ask the priest his recommendation, ask his blessing. Now, sometimes as a priest, just like a parent allows a child to make some of their own mistakes, I give the parish council a certain amount of freedom to do things. And in fact, going back to this, the priest is the head, but he also can't do everything himself. Not to mention, there are people on the parish council and in our parish who are more skilled at certain things than I am. For example, finances. I didn't study finance. I'm not a successful businessman. So a lot of times I will go to somebody in our parish who has those expertise and ask them their opinion. But at the end, it should be the priest whose recommendation they follow. Our priests, especially these days, it wasn't always the case, but these days, the priest is a very educated person. I've, for example, gone to school for as many years as a doctor, maybe even more than some doctors. So there are a number of things that we're taught. I have multiple degrees, and it's not just me. Our archdiocese mandates that a priest have a master's degree, because a priest has to be educated. He's in charge of so much. But again, we're not experts in everything, so I often look to other people to help me out. There are people within the parish who are counselors, psychologists. I can't do psychological counseling, so I often send people, refer them to a counselor, and sometimes I work together with a counselor when we have that person's permission. And that's a beautiful thing. Again, with finances, if I have a medical question, recently our archdiocese has been in contact with many doctors to talk about coronavirus and the risks and how to keep everyone safe. So we as clergy know the spiritual aspect, but we also get the advice of others. And so the role of the priest is to be the head of the church, but there are many other parts of the church. The whole body of the church is very important and integral. And as I've said oftentimes in my sermon, I am the priest to you, the parishioners of St. George, but you, the parishioners, are also the priests, part of the royal priesthood, to the greater Charleston area. So we ask you to help in the priest ministry, but it is the ministry, it's actually Christ's ministry, which was entrusted to the priest, and the priest has the people to help in the ministry. Another question here. How do you adjust when you're at a funeral, then go to a wedding? That's a good question. You know, the job of a priest is so difficult. There are a lot of ups and downs. There are times when we cry with people and other times when we rejoice with people. And that's actually just what the scripture tells us to do. It says, rejoice with those who are rejoicing and weep with those who are weeping. And so I guess it's just part of who we become. And I have actually done this before. I've gone from a funeral in the morning to a baptism or a wedding in the afternoon. And I feel sad with the people in the funeral service. And then I go straight into the wedding or baptism, and I feel joy with those people. And it's not fake at all. I try to be everything to all people as much as possible, because that's what St. Paul teaches us to do. And so, but we can do everything with joy, even the funerals, because we're a people of hope. We're a people that hope in the resurrection. So funeral is not the end of the story for us. And I've been to some very, very sad funerals. Of course, all funerals are sad, but some are even more tragic and upsetting. And we weep with those people, we console them, but then we also have to continue doing the ministry of the church. And so I can't say that some things don't weigh on me more than others, but it's important to be present in the moment wherever I'm at. So I could be having a very bad day myself, but when I get a phone call, I have to put away my emotions and be 100% present for the people who need me at that point. So thank you for that question. We have another question here. Is it okay to be cremated? So the teaching of the Orthodox Church is that cremation is not acceptable form. So we believe, according to the book of Ezekiel and to our Nicene Creed, that we are going to be resurrected. Our bodies are going to come back together. They're going to be remembered, and our soul will come back to our body. And we will have a new resurrected body. It's going to be new and improved. It's not going to have any health issues, any pain, nothing. It's going to be a perfect body that Christ brings back to us. And to me, even from a scientific point of view, it makes sense, because science teaches us that when things, energy never goes away, right? So energy just goes from one thing and transfers into another. So when my body decomposes, where does that go? It goes into the world. Are we saying that God can't take that energy and bring it back into the form of my body? Didn't he create us out of dust anyway? Of course he could bring that energy back and recreate my body and put my soul back. But when you're cremating your body, you are specifically almost turning your face from God, saying, I don't want my body. And we are, as Orthodox Christians, we don't think the body is evil. God created it, so how could it be evil? Our bodies are important. We take care of them. We don't mark them up with tattoos or anything. We respect our body. We take care of our bodies. That's why even exercise and eating well are important. That's why gluttony is a sin, right? One of the reasons. So that's why we do not burn somebody's remains after they die. The other thing, there are some places that don't have enough burial space. One of those places is Mount Athos. It's that peninsula in Greece where there are all the monasteries. So what do? They do what they do in a lot of other countries. In fact, I got to see my family's mausoleum in Lebanon. You bury somebody, and then when they decompose, you take their remains, the bones that remain, and you put them away somewhere. So on Mount Athos, for example, when somebody dies, they bury them for a short period of time. When it's time for the next monk to be buried, they remove the remains of the previous monk. They actually write on his skull the date of his death and his name, and they take all of his bones and neatly put it in a special room so that there'll be room for somebody else. Because if everyone was going to be buried and they weren't going to reuse the space, there wouldn't be any space for anyone to live. And they do that in a lot of older countries. You know, America is still kind of new. But in Lebanon, you see that a lot. You see a family has a mausoleum. You put somebody in. When they're done, they just push all the remains to the back, and then they put the next person in. So the whole family ends up in there. And that's the Orthodox tradition. So thank you for that question. On the category of death, since we're already there, question was, does our church believe in reincarnation? We do not believe in reincarnation. We believe that once we die, We will go either to paradise or to punishment. We'll await our final judgment, where then we will go to heaven or hell with our reformed body. So we do not believe in reincarnation, because then there'd be like no point to life if you're just going to keep coming back as something else. The whole point of life from a Christian perspective is to be with God. So if you're being reincarnate, that's almost like a hell, because you're being away from God over and over and over again. The whole point is to be with God. And so that's the whole point of our life, is to prepare ourselves to be with God. Thank you for that question. Can you explain the thoughts between the Catholic and Orthodox religions concerning clergy being allowed to marry? Good question. So, clergy have always been allowed to marry in the history of the church. So even before there was an Orthodox and a Catholic church, remember, they shared the same history for 1,054 years approximately. Clergy in what is now the Roman Catholic Church were also allowed to marry. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church says that the Pope sits on the throne of St. Peter. St. Peter was married. Do you remember Jesus cured his mother-in-law? Mother-in-law implies wife. So St. Peter himself was married. So there was never an issue with clergy being married. The issue came later on. In the hierarchical church structure, the archdiocese owns the land and owns the churches, and everything that the church owns, the archdiocese owns. So what if there was a married bishop? The married bishop, when he died, if he had full control over the land, some bishops were leaving the land and church property to their heirs, to their children. So that was one of the reasons that in the West they ended the married clergy, is because they were passing on church property to their heirs. The other thing is the fairness to the family. So in the Orthodox Church, we don't have bishops marry, because it would not be fair for them to, it would not be fair to their families. So even as a priest, my family gives up a lot of time. So like now it's almost 8 p.m. and my family doesn't have me with them because I'm teaching. And I'm happy to do that, and they're happy for me to do that. And they're actually participating in my teaching from our living room, watching this Ask Abouna session. But there is a lot of sacrifice. Now, take that and take your average bishop has anywhere, like our metropolitan has 275 parishes. Our Bishop Thomas has somewhere over 30 parishes. Some of our other bishops in this diocese have over 50 parishes. So can you imagine taking what I do and multiplying that by 30 or 50 or 275, right? That would not be fair to a family. And so the bishops in the Orthodox Church don't get married, not because marriage is dirty in any kind of way. It's a sacrament of the church. It's a beautiful thing. And in fact, we have a bishop in our archdiocese who was married, but when his wife died, he was eligible then to become a bishop. The other reason, and this is probably the most important reason, is that the more you have, the more you are afraid to lose. So let's say there was a controversy over theology, and let's say somebody threatened my family as a priest and said either vote with us or do what we say, or we'll kill your family or harm your family somehow, which especially in the old days and even sometimes today, that kind of thing happens. You know, the priest sometimes is worried about his livelihood and so gives in to things that people in the parish may want that are not good for their souls, because he's afraid of losing the financial stability for his family. Well, a bishop is not afraid of that because he has nothing to lose. And that's why bishops used to come from the monastic ranks. It used to be a monk that they would elect, because they're used to having nothing. And if they went back to nothing, they'd be very happy with that as well. So they can never be threatened. You can take away literally everything from them and they wouldn't care. With the priest, it's a little scarier because he has a family. But that's why the bishop has full authority over the priest. So if I was to try and compromise something in the church because I was afraid of losing my job, my bishop can jump right in and say, hey, hold on. The priest isn't going anywhere. And if anything, I can move him somewhere else so that he'll be safe. But you're not going to be able to get away with threatening anyone. If you want to threaten me as the bishop, go ahead, try it. And so that was one of the reasons that bishops are not married. Okay, so great questions here today. We have another one. Was Christ really born on Christmas Day? So there was a more modern teaching that Christ was born in the spring. And this was based off of some bad premises. And again, I say this is a modern teaching. This is not at all an ancient teaching of the church. Somebody at one point, somebody who obviously had never been to the Middle East, thought that because there were shepherds in the field, Jesus had to have been born in the spring because in the winter there's snow. Well, if you've ever been to the Middle East in the winter, the word for winter in Arabic is shite, which actually means rain. So does it snow in the Middle East? Occasionally. It snows in certain areas, not everywhere. But it can snow. But when it does, it's usually a dusting of snow. It's nothing too crazy. But the shepherds who lived in those regions, they didn't migrate south. They lived in their same areas. And guess what? The sheep still had to graze. So there were still shepherds in the field. Our understanding and the ancient understanding was that Jesus Christ died on the same day he was conceived. This was an ancient Christian teaching. So if he died in the spring, which that we know because it happened at the Passover, he had to have been conceived in the spring, which is about March or April, which means he would have been born in the winter. So there's really nothing to point to the fact that Jesus was not born in December. I believe he was born in the winter sometime. But regardless, that's not really very important. That shouldn't make or break our faith, what day he was born. The important thing is that he was born. He was incarnate. And we have to pick a day to celebrate. Was it exactly on December 25th? I can't tell you. I wasn't there. The record keeping wasn't great back then. He was born in a cave in Bethlehem because remember they were traveling to fulfill the census that the government had ordered them to do. So they had to travel out of Nazareth back to Bethlehem, where their family was originally from. So we don't have an exact date. The church has picked December 25th for whatever reason, whether it was godly inspired or not. But I do believe that Jesus was born in the winter, and we do celebrate his birth in the winter. So good question. Another question here. In the early church, wasn't there just one bishop in each city rather than today's situation of a bishop being over many churches in many cities in many countries or areas? So yes, Andrew, our situation specifically here in America, what some people call the diaspora, so places that were not traditionally Orthodox, but Orthodox people left their homelands to come to. So you have North America, South America, Australia, Western Europe, like Spain and France and Germany, places that were not traditionally Orthodox, at least since the split of the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches. The canon was that it would just be one bishop per city. So, for example, we would not have 3 or 4 or 5, however many we have, archbishops of New York. You would only have one archbishop of New York. So that is the correct teaching. And then that bishop would be the bishop of that city and the surrounding area. So if you go to the Church of Greece or Constantinople or Antioch or Alexandria, you still see that model, the traditional model where there is one bishop in an area, in a city, and he has that surrounding area that he is over. That is the correct model. In North America, we're still a young church, relatively speaking. Orthodoxy's only been here for about 200 years. So we're still trying to figure things out. And we have a confusion because when people came into America, they brought their church with them. So you had people from Greece, from now modern day Turkey, from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Georgia, all these different Orthodox countries. So what do you do here? When they were coming in, just individual communities here and there, communication wasn't great. They probably didn't even know that there were other Orthodox around. They were under their own people. So actually the Antiochian church, before it was the Antiochian church, was under the Russian church, because remember, St. Raphael was under Russia, but there was a church under Constantinople as well. And then Antioch, all the Middle Easterners split off of Russia, off of Moscow, and they formed their own archdiocese under the Patriarch of Antioch. And so America is certainly far from perfect. We're still a young church. It doesn't mean that we're doing anything sinful, but eventually we will hopefully all become one church in North America, but we're not quite there yet. It's going to take a while, and it has to happen naturally. It can't be forced. If it gets forced, there's going to be a lot of controversy, a lot of people leaving the church, some people leaving the church. So we have to tread carefully in doing that. There was an assembly of bishops whose sole purpose was to discover how to do that. They've gotten off course from doing that because it was very contested on how that was going to look. So the Assembly of Bishops still meets, and they have different committees, and they've realized that they had to take a big step back and very slowly start working on some ground root stuff. So for example, our Bishop Thomas is in charge of the Assembly of Bishops youth ministry. So he oversees youth ministry for all Orthodox across North America. That doesn't mean he can go into the Greek Archdiocese or the OCA or anywhere and tell them how to do their youth work. But as far as the Assembly of Bishops' official recommendation for something, he is the overseer for that. So we're getting there, but it's going to take years. And I think it's going to happen from the parishes. So when we have pan-Orthodox events in our parish, eventually we'll come together and we'll ask our bishops, hey, can we just have one bishop? We're all friends here. We all love each other. We're all brothers and sisters. We just have one bishop? I think eventually that's how it'll happen. But I think we're also a little bit far off. People are too stuck on their own ways of doing things. So we have to give up a little bit of ego before we can get there. And it looks like we have a dumb question. Just kidding. John asked he says, this is a really dumb question, but I am okay with that. Do Jews believe there is a God? Do Jews believe that Jesus is the Messiah? So the Jews believe in God, but they do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. The ones who did believe that Jesus is the Messiah have become Christian. Actually, the Protestants, I want to say in maybe the 60s, 70s, 80s, I can't remember exactly when, they started a movement called Jews for Jesus. And the point of that movement was to convert Jews from traditional Judaism to Christianity, really, with a Jewish flavor. And so that's what the Jews for Jesus movement was. But traditional Jews, if somebody says they're Jewish, they do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but they believe in the God of Israel, how he's referred to in the Old Testament, which is our God. They just don't have a full understanding of him as God in Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and certainly not as Jesus Christ as the incarnate Son of God. In fact, that's why Jesus was killed, because he said that he was the Son of God. Good question. We have a few more minutes. If anyone else has a question, I have one more here. What does the church think about the group of people that think Jesus was married? Well, people think all kinds of things. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is done because it makes money. So if I write a book saying that Jesus was married, all of a sudden people are like, oh, wow, look at that. Jesus was married. Because even though the Bible is 2,000 years old almost, all of a sudden something brand new comes up with no backing, and people are rushed to say, "Oh, this is real." So somebody, when the Da Vinci Code came out, people were running to me. I wasn't a priest yet, but they were saying, I was a subdeacon. Subdeacon, look at this. Have you seen the Da Vinci Code? Is it true? So all of a sudden, a movie that was written as fiction, people will tend to believe that more than the Bible that's been around for 2,000 years. That's crazy. So if people think that Jesus was married, they're not serious Christians. There's nowhere in the Bible that alludes to that. He wouldn't have had time to have been married. He started his public ministry, and 3 years later, he was killed. He was always traveling with a group of disciples. So it makes no sense for him to have been married. They can say, "Oh, well, he loved Mary Magdalene," and things like that. Mary Magdalene was the sister of Martha and Lazarus. So he was not with her when Lazarus died, right? He was traveling with his disciples. It never said anything about Jesus being her husband or anything like that. Don't you think they would have put an important fact like that into the Gospels? I think so. But there's nothing for that. So that's my answer to that. It's just another silly idea that people came up with in order to stir up controversy. That's certainly why the devil encouraged them to do it. But also, it was probably just a way to make money. And it's nothing more than fiction. So we just ignore it. I don't spend a lot of time getting excited about that stuff. The church has been here for 2,000 years. Another heresy. What's another heresy? There have been much worse heresies in time. So we have about 5 more minutes if there are any more questions. If you noticed, outside of our church, we put up a beautiful banner that says, it has our church logo and says, "We're praying for peace in the world," which we certainly do, and especially around this time now with everything going on. We always pray for peace in the world in our liturgy. And we are especially praying for peace in our nation as it's divided and so many people are getting hurt and killed and all these awful things that are happening. So we thank our donors who sponsored that for us. Okay, how could Jesus have brothers? Wasn't James his brother? Yes, Jesus had brothers and sisters, right? But they were not his biological brothers and sisters. There are 2 explanations for the fact that Jesus had brothers and sisters. The first one is that Joseph, his stepfather, had children from a previous marriage. So they would not be Jesus's biological siblings. They'd be his stepbrothers and sisters. We believe that Joseph had 8 children. One of them was James, the first bishop of Jerusalem, who wrote one of the epistles. The other explanation was that they could have been Jesus's cousins, because cousins would have been considered siblings in those days. And there is some biblical precedent for that. But either way, the Virgin Mary was a virgin before, during, and after the life of Christ. So she never had any other children. So thank you for that question. And our last question probably here, is there any literature anywhere showing Jesus as a teenager? Why see him as a baby and then as an adult? So the oldest we see Jesus before his adult ministry was 12 years old. Excuse me. And he teaches at 12 years old in the temple, and that's very significant because he's teaching while still considered a child. Remember in the Bible, in the Gospels, when Jesus was teaching in the temple at 12, how old do you have to be a man or a woman in Judaism? 13, right? When you have your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. So Jesus at 12 years old was not considered a man yet. He was a child, yet with the wisdom of God teaching in the temple. That's why it was so amazing that he was doing that. And that's the last we see of Jesus until his public ministry at 30 years old. What happened during that time? There are some people who have had guesses. There are some, they call them gospels, but they're not part of the Bible. They say the Gospel of Thomas. It's a non-canonical book, so we don't know for sure. So there are some stories about Jesus during that time, but we don't have anything for sure. That time is just left a mystery, and I don't think it's needed for our salvation. Would it be nice to know? Sure, but the church specifically chose to not include that because it wasn't important. He was being a human because he was fully man, right? He was probably helping his father at work, which is what a young son would have done. And so we don't have a lot about Jesus's life. We have mostly his infancy, a little bit in his childhood after he came back from Egypt. And then we have the most important part, his ministry. And all those things point to our salvation and why Jesus Christ did the things he did for our salvation. Those teenage years probably don't matter much to us. So thank you all for watching. God bless you. I've enjoyed speaking with you this evening. We'll be with you again next week. Until then, God bless you and stay safe. And again, you don't have to RSVP to come to church anymore. So you're welcome to just come, and we will try to do our best to keep you safe. Good night.